Would you like to? I'm on the pod with Adam Gurri, editor and owner of Liberal Current. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you for having me. Yeah, as you said, the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Liberal Currents.
Can you describe Liberal Current to us?
It's an online publication where we try and have an well, we make the best case for liberalism on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's sort of an inside conversation among liberals of many different kinds, because it's an old tradition at this point, and there's a lot of different perspectives within it.
Do you know the idea of like anarcho-platformism?
Platformism? No.
Basically, it's just like a group of anarchists who just believe in not one school, but just like broadening the idea of anarchism. So they're not like they focus on
Okay.
schools, but also yeah. So I don't
That
describe you as would you describe yourself almost like as a liberal platformist, really more interested in like liberalism as a whole than any one school of liberalism?
Yeah, I mean, I have my own perspective, and it's a pretty specific one. But the parallel that I drew when we started was with uh, C.S. Lewis had a book that was called Mere Christianity, and it was supposed to be a kind of like non-denominational view of what all the different Christian traditions had in common. So I liked the idea of a mere liberalism where there's a lot of shared values across most kinds of liberalism. They get there from a lot of different paths, and sometimes they end up on opposite sides of like partisan politics or whatever the politics of the day are. But yeah, there's quite a lot to the liberal tradition. Um, and yeah, so that's how I think about it.
How did you get into liberalism and politics more broadly?
Um, well, I was very political when I was a lot younger, and then I went through a period of sort of withdrawing from politics for a few years, and sort of reflecting and just reading political philosophy, reading a few things, but sort of withdrawing from politics itself for a while. But then, to be maybe it's uninteresting, but basically Trump happened, and it was a wake up call. And a few of us, it wasn't just me in the beginning either. It was Paul Kreider. I don't know if you know him, and Jason Brigham, another one of our founding editors. We had been writing various things together for a while and known each other for a while. And we decided that it was time to do this, to do something for liberalism in America. Um, Obviously, not just America, but the inspiration was very local and very much the Trump phenomena.
So what made you declare yourself as a liberal? What convictions led you to calling yourself a liberal? Or did that like just
Yeah,
happen out of nowhere?
yeah. So I again, when I was younger and a lot more politically hot-headed, like I got into a lot of the different arguments. You were talking about how within anarchism, there's a ton of different branches, and
Sectarian conflict.
they all fight each other. And you know, I had gone through a libertarian phase for a period as well, and libertarians are like the sub labels of libertarianism are insane, and oftentimes people are giving themselves different labels, um, but they still believe 100% the same things. It's all just like positioning.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm a geopiratist, neo feudalist,
Right,
stuff
exactly,
like that. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And there just came a moment with Trump being the way he was, where I was just like, you know, at the end of the day, like my beliefs are just a very boringly conventional liberal. Like I believe in letting people have people being free to make their own choices and lead their own lives and empowering them to do that. And I believe that like anyone, I believe in immigration. I believe people should be able to move and live where they want. Just very like basic stuff. And it was just that very stark wake up call of here's a guy that just very bluntly represents the most retrograde crap imaginable, that is actually gaining a prominent platform, and he has a huge support base in this country. It's like the idea of like fighting over, well, among lefties, there's like, well, I'm not really a liberal. I'm a leftist, or I'm a progressive, or I'm a left socialist. And or within liberals, there's like, well, I'm a natural rights liberal, or I'm a utilitarian, or whatever it is, or I believe in this version of public health care versus that. It's like, yeah, we can debate those details, but like at the end of the day, we got to rally and actually protect the core
Get
thing,
something done.
you know.
Yeah. So, what type of liberal thinkers, I guess, like, would you draw your tradition to? Would you say like, because there's a variety. You see a lot of people online will be like, yeah, I'm like a Kantian liberal. Yeah, I'm a Millian liberal. Yeah. Now we see a lot of like Rawlsian liberals. Where would you place yourself on that? Like,
So a guy who is alive right now and writing right now, um, Jacob Levy, was sort of one of my biggest inspirations, especially to begin with. And he's more of a like Montesquieu and Madison and Smith, like basically instead of so you mentioned Kant. Kant in the German tradition is like the thinking of society as a harmonious whole that you're working towards liberal ends. Um, and the utilitarians obviously that are you just do whatever gets the best results. Um, and but the checks and balances type school is much more about like how do we set up the institutions so that people you're minimizing the amount that people are getting oppressed and coerced and dominated and things like that. So it's much more like focusing on how do we arrange this stuff so that you assume the worst of everyone in a certain sense. Like you assume that every institution that you're thinking of or could design is going to misbehave at some point or at some level. Um, and so you're thinking of how to balance that against other things that may misbehave in different ways. Something that I wrote very early on in the very first year um, was about how we can't really get away from human vulnerability and human dependence. So like I talked about it, I talked about kids basically, and kids, you know, especially like an infant, but even like little kids are by their nature they're dependent on adults, and they're very vulnerable. Um, and for a huge number of reasons, their biological parents are sort of like plan A for who raises them. Um, both there's like biological imperatives for why a parent would be more likely to be protective than not perhaps or but I don't like arguments like that but I think there's something to it, right? But also there's a huge cultural expectation that parents are going to be the ones that take responsibility for them, so there's like all these reasons that parents would be the best possible ones that you could find, but and yet parents still abuse kids. That still happens, right? And so you have to have a system that comes in and makes sure that if a parent is abusing a kid, there's some avenue for taking those kids away from them or stopping the parent or something, right? But anyone who knows anything about child services in this country knows it. Like, if the rate of parents abusing kids is bad, the rate of child services ending up mistreating kids is like worse, right? So the solution to the problem with parents ends up being worse, and everything you do to try and offset the vulnerability has its own risks, basically. And not to put it too like depressingly or pessimistically. And the point isn't like everything is terrible. The point is you do the best you can with our limited, human, uh, you know,
would you say is
limitations.
it like a would you describe this as like a realpolitik liberalism? Because that's almost what it's coming across to me as this type of like realpolitik type thing.
Yeah, probably less cynically, you could call it pragmatism, I guess. Like, because American pragmatism very much is just a strain of American liberalism, um, and it's just sort of a yeah, like we do the best we can, basically. Like we
Yeah.
do with what we've got. And sometimes that's a very small improvement, and sometimes it's a big one, and you sort of go for the opportunities you can get to make things better.
Yeah, I really like the Richard Rorty type of like radical liberalism. I guess I would describe it. That's the most compelling strand for me. So I share a lot of similarities with you probably.
For sure. Yeah, he probably considered himself not a liberal. He probably considered himself a man of the left. Um,
He called himself something different depending on the audience. It was really strange.
sure, sure. Well, but that's how it goes. I mean, he didn't, he didn't believe in truth, so he didn't really believe in like making a big deal about labels either, I'm sure.
Yeah. He was a true pragmatist about everything.
Yeah.
Uh, so I guess for the audience, like I have everyone in the audience, right? But I have a lot of lefties. Okay, why should they be liberals? Okay, let's say I'm like a Marxist, right? Why should I? What do I have to gain from adopting more liberalism into my thought?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that most of them probably are liberal already in a meaningful way, unless they're like a tanky or something, someone who's like who's defending,
Yeah,
Xi in China
Stalin.
or Putin or Stalin. Yeah, oh God's sake, for actually Stalin. Unless they're that kind of person, which is I assume a very different kind of person from what you mean. Um, but for the most part, I feel like it's just the in the 20th century, the socialists that went the other way, that set themselves apart from the Soviet Union, ended up by and large becoming social democrats. And the liberals, who started out mostly uh, pessimistic about state power, sort of became more welfarist and regulatory, and moved in the direction of that. So a lot of like a lot of people who consider themselves socialists and who are very deep into this socialist intellectual tradition are not that different from liberals in their actual daily politics, like in terms of what they would aim for, um, if they are not, mostly like a radical theorist or something who's just rejected the notion of regular politics to begin with. Um, for that second kind of person, I'd have a very different pitch. Um, Paul Kreider, who I mentioned, has a big essay on the socialist liberal nexus and sort of their shared history, which I can just put the link in the chat with you. Um,
It's hard to really untangle this trend. Like you have Rawls, and every other week on Twitter there's a debate over if Rawls was a socialist, and it's just you have this debate with like liberal thinker X, was he a liberal? And then we have like 10 hour long debates on that, and
yeah,
everyone hates each other after it.
and I will say I am not exactly the deepest read in the socialist intellectual tradition. I've read some things and I've read sort of like secondary works. Um, but one of the most surprising things about what's happened with liberal currents in just like the last 2 or 3 years, I would say, is there's a lot of young people like in their early 20s or even like your age or just a little bit older, um, who were clearly very well read in the socialist tradition, but yet agreed with 100% of the things that we write at Liberal Currents, which was
That
not.
would be like the Matt McMahon. That would be like almost like the Matt McManus type I would describe.
Yeah, I mean, Matt McManus, I think, is a special case. But like even like Sharon Kurovia, I don't know if you know her.
I feel like I've
Um,
heard of her. I probably
yeah.
read an article from her a while back.
Um, and she sort of has a big social circle of people her age, and they all are very similar to me in worldview, but they're coming at it from a completely different origin point. And I don't really like it's not a, liberal currents has its purpose, and it's amazing to me that they find it attractive and appealing. Um, I don't really like it doesn't bother me if someone thinks of themselves as a socialist, I guess is what I'm getting at. Like I have a lot of interesting conversations with people who consider themselves that, and we ultimately agree that like we're voting for Biden over Trump. Like we believe in, you know, universal health care, and we want to fight climate change, and we believe
Yeah,
in trying to like help people have autonomy and have more generous immigration. So it's like at the end of the day, like the things we criticize each other for are pretty like high intellectual things, and the things that we agree with are much more basic. So if they want
yeah,
to think of themselves as socialists, and I think of myself as a liberal, I don't like that. Mostly that comes down to like some intellectual commitments, but like at the end of the day, we meet pretty close together.
yeah. Like I even think 50 years from now, most of our goals are still probably going to be the same. It's just I just can't see any way in which we don't share the same goals for a really far foreseeable future.
For sure.
I will
Incidentally,
say also.
oh, go
Oh,
on.
sorry, you can talk.
No, you first.
You first. I'll let you talk. I was moving on to a different topic, so you can go here.
Well, the funny so Paul, so as I mentioned, I had gone through a libertarian phase before, as had Paul, um, and he sort of wrote his farewell letter to that in our first or second year. Because so on top of writing this thing about socialism, a while ago he wrote this thing about anarchism too. Since you mentioned anarchism, that I'll share with you. But the type of anarchism that we tended to encounter, um, our our perspective in Paul's that he says here is essentially like, and this happens too with like a lot of extreme Marxists who refuse to participate in politics or think that the Democratic Party is too corrupt to encourage to give legitimacy by voting for or something like that. Um, it's like it's the critiques that they have of the state, any state, even the best state, are not necessarily wrong. And like those Marxists I mentioned, the critique that they have of the Democratic Party or the critique that they have of a particular politician or institutions might not necessarily be wrong, but it doesn't actually give you a positive agenda to then spring from that on off
That
in the case of anarchism it's like let's get rid of the state. Okay, my position on that is as long as you have rapid transportation and rapid communication, you're going to have people that organize the use of force on a large scale.
yeah,
um,
that's a discussion actually. Me and if you know unlearning economics, we arrived at a similar point after reading "Seeing Like a State." It just seems like we're gonna end up recreating these state power mechanisms,
right, exactly.
and
Anyway,
they'd be like, "No, it's governance, not a state," or "It's a state, not governance," and those type of stuff. And
right, no, and
then we have
there's a
like a
kind
20, and then we have like a 30 tweet long discussion about what those words mean.
right now, and there's a kind of anarchist that likes to point to like really specific historical things like medieval Iceland or like customary law in England. And like when you actually look at these things, they were like A, very small scale, and B, like extremely reactionary societies
Yes,
where
yes,
the ways that they managed to govern themselves was you did not exist as an individual legally. You just existed as a representative of your clan. And if you committed a crime, they might not execute you, but they would declare you an outlaw, which effectively meant you did not have the protection of the community, which meant that your enemy could come and kill you. So you were effectively still sentenced to death, just sort of like indirectly, things like that,
yeah.
where it's
I
like,
don't know if
okay,
Keegs, yeah, I don't know if Keegs or it's either Keegs or Unlearning again talked about this, where the book is just an anarchist state, but all the punishments are like just basically like beating people up and stuff like that, and the whole thing basically is all the punishment eventually devolve into like basically how much force can we use against you. Okay. And so that's the thing I often see is like for me anarchism seems to be less valuable as an end goal than it is like a critique. Because I almost view anarchism as like almost ultra liberalism. Like it seems like a lot of anarchists, especially like Proudhound, are just liberals taken to the extreme.
yeah, it's in a
I,
yeah,
I think
it's
it's you know G.A. Cohen at all.
sorry, whom?
Basically, his point was that like Marxists have trouble dealing with libertarians. I think it's a similar thing with liberals and anarchists, where it's just because you agree on so many points with them. It's just finding out why we disagree is very difficult.
Yeah, do you know Corey Massimino? He's like, I think he's done things with the State Center for Stateless Society. Um,
Uh, Again, I've probably heard of him, but like if he's but I it's just familiarity.
yeah, he's great. I like him a lot. He's definitely an anarchist. We just sort of have he's one that I always have a good time talking with because he's sort of like we understand each other's point of views. And I think he's utopian and he thinks I'm too pessimistic, but he can accurately describe my point of view and say there's something, he says to me that he can see why someone with liberal commitments would believe this. If you make a few assumptions about the empirical world, basically, that you think that. So there's a few. I definitely have a few that I talk to that I respect.
Yeah. So then I guess so. What led you to what? So then we that led you to liberalism. What led you to adopting this idea of liberal currents as this like pluralist platform for like all schools of liberalism?
Yeah, so we were very inspired by Jacobin, for example, just sort of seeing how they carved out a niche for themselves very successfully. Of course, we were trying to do kind of the opposite of what they were doing. And what they were doing was taking what had essentially been a dead political position, at least in American politics, and try and be the forefront of its intellectual revival. Whereas what we wanted to do was take something that's kind of like taken for granted in a lot of successful liberal democracies and say, well, no, we have to take this seriously. Like we have to actually like, especially like in light of the fact that like it's still fragile. It could still you could still lose it, what we have, the accomplishments that we've made so far. Like you have to take seriously what we have, what we've accomplished, and understand it and its limitations, and really think about it. And what that means is taking on board everyone who cares about those things, even if they have different reasons for caring about them, and talking about it from all those different angles.
So then, so onto like platform creation, right? How do you think people, politically active people, if they want to go about making something like liberal currents, do you think there's any way that they could do it?
Well, it was surprisingly easy for us. Um, of course, I the three of us co-founders, and then also the various editors that we brought on since, all of us are sort of this is our passion project. We're all working full-time jobs and supporting this, and then we have the Patreon, which is how we pay our writers. Um, but really and truly, it's just if you you talking about all the people that you have already met and talked to in online and just in intellectual spaces, like it's as simple as that really. Like you start forming groups of people that are maybe not 100% like-minded, but like have similar interests, and it starts out as conversations, and eventually it turns into writing things that are longer, and then you're doing it together, and then you've got a platform essentially where you can bring other people on.
And then, and then from there, how do you think people should go about getting into writing, getting into political content creation? Do you have any ways? Do you have any places that they should go to read through? Any any places that are good sources? Any like institutes, stuff like that, do stuff like it?
To do it like to really like get jump both feet in and like do it as what you do for a
Yeah,
living
like
and things like that.
let's say if anybody want to just create something big like you did, they want to this was their like how they want to make impact. How would you recommend they do that?
Yeah, I mean it's hard. Um, there are a lot of different publications. I mean, there's us, there's Dissent, there's a lot out there. Um, there are different, there's different think tanks and things like Niskanen. Um, it's hard though. I mean, like I said, we all just have separate, unrelated full-time jobs, and that allows us a measure of independence. Um, the path, the path for doing something like what we did and going, full time or whatever is probably more like what the neoliberal gang did. Um, the funny thing is they started out not like with writing, but with just like memes and things like that. But they built this like online presence and this redefinition of what neoliberal means, and it gained traction. It got some grants, like small grants, not stuff that they could live off of, but enough that they also started a publication. And then eventually they made enough of a name for themselves that they got absorbed into uh, a uh, what is it? It's like the Institute for Progress or something. It's basically they got absorbed into an actual think tank, and that's where they've all ended up. But it's not easy. It's sort of a lottery for like actually doing stuff like that. In terms of making a difference, I would say local local like to be boring like local politics, local political action, especially if you live in a town and you can get involved in housing, YIMBY type stuff, urbanism. Um, one of the biggest things that's hanging over people's heads is cost of living, and that's also an issue that's making a ton of headway these days. Like there's a ton of reforms that have come out in some of the most expensive parts of the country to try and bring down the cost of housing. So there's a lot of energy there in several directions. There's conventional liberal urbanist groups um, which, by the way, not Jason Brigham himself, though he was involved, but Jason Brigham's wife um, uh, was the co-founder of a local urbanist group in Austin, Texas, which has had a tremendous influence there. So either joining something or starting something where you are, um, there's a lot to do there. I mean, how's for me in terms of things people can move the needle on right now that is very impactful. Housing is huge, um, but there's also other things. There's always places to volunteer at for either humanitarian purposes. Um, Obviously, if you're doing something like if little bit older than you, someone who's gone to like law school or is in law school, there's always need for public law people to help out with immigrants who are stuck in our horrible system, or right now the sanctuary seeker, the asylum seekers. Um, yeah, there's a lot. It's but because there's so much, any one thing is like you're a small part of the whole. Um, but there is a lot to do, and I definitely don't underestimate local urban politics right now. That's the momentum on that is very big right now, and if we actually take advantage of this political moment and enact some big changes, that can make a huge difference. Because exploding cost of living is probably the worst thing about this country, and just like in terms of sheer quality of life metrics, not talking about some other big problems like you know Trumpian politics or the abuses in the criminal justice system or things like that, but like just in terms of a basic quality of life for the ordinary person in America, cost of living, and because of that, the way that we do housing is huge, and it's a good moment to push it in the right direction.
So then, how would do you think you mentioned earlier? Do you think posting is the future of politics? Oftentimes, people say like posting is the future. Do you agree with that to any point?
Do you know Dre, like the I don't know their actual name, but Dre wrote something about a theory of posting, saying that posting is praxis.
No, I didn't. I know. I know there's one guy. I'm trying to remember his name. He was a neolib guy, and then he was the one who came up with um the first image of Dark Brandon. That guy, if I Tobin, Tobin.
So I think, well, so I don't know if you know, but my dad, Martin Gurri, wrote a book that is about the impact of social media on societies, but politics. And so I'm definitely not one to underestimate its effect on politics, and I don't think, like, I think you should do it, and it's a relatively easy thing to do and straightforward. Um, but I don't, and I think that it can have influence. It's sort of like an elite influence thing that can happen. You can influence some journalists, perhaps, who then have broader influence. We're pretty sure that like Jerome Powell has been reading stuff about himself on Twitter and things like that. I don't know that that actually influenced anything he did. I think he was just amused by it. Um,
I kind of hope Jay Powell is the reason that we've seen all the rate changes. I kind of hope that's true because that means that my post when I was an econ on Twitter might have had a change on monetary policy.
exactly, exactly. Um, so I mean, yes, definitely. I mean, it is. It already is part of politics. It's already, the public sphere, the public discussion is a hugely important part of politics. And the internet and posting has already swallowed all that up. Like it is important. It is, but it's influential anyway. Um, and you should do it, yes, and you should engage in these arguments and discussions. I wouldn't overestimate how much your individual influence is going to be, though, because there are a lot of people involved, right? Um, uh, so yeah, I mean, yes, it's going. I don't know exactly how it's all going to play out in the end, but it's clearly going to. for the foreseeable future be part of how we just do public discussions, and public discussions do influence policy and politics. Uh, so short version, yes. I mean, is whether it's the future, you still need people on the ground. It is easy to confuse one for the other. So it's that person I mentioned, Dre, wrote that they they were chalking up the victories in housing policy that I was mentioning to basically YIMBY posters online. And I mean, I don't think there's nothing to that, but I also think that there's a lot of legwork that is done that's more invisible by activists in California and New York and other places. Um, it's just them talking to their local officials or their state representatives. Um, that that is probably more influential than the posting. Not that the posting isn't influential. So you need it all. Um, you need, as again, to do the pragmatism bit, you just sort of need to attack it from every angle you can, including people on the ground.
Yeah. Do you think? So do you think then too? Oftentimes, a lot of I think a lot of problems on online politics arise because people can't separate the idea of um of online politics from from physical politics. I don't know how much this will increase. I don't know what we can do to deal with it.
Sorry to deal
With this,
what's it?
basically, people not being able to handle the divide between like actual politics and the Twitter politics.
Yeah, I mean that's an age-old problem though. Even before the internet, like people would read their particular magazine. It's like the famous picture of Harry Truman holding a newspaper that said Dewey defeats Truman. That newspaper had just polled its own subscribers and concluded that Truman was going to lose in a landslide. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, its subscribers were much richer than the average American voter, and much more conservative. So yeah, their subscribers were overwhelmingly uh, against Truman, but they didn't really represent the country, right? Um, it's really hard. Like when you're in the media and you're mostly reading media and talking to other people in media, it can be really hard to tell, or even worse, I would say, than being in media, because people in media have to actually interview real other people often, right? They get some exposure. But if your main interaction with politics is just reading the media and not you don't have something more a more direct connection, it is really easy to like get detached from the stuff going on the ground. And I don't think there's a solution for that. You can get involved yourself, but then you'll just have a concrete sense of your little corner. So yeah, you just do the best you can, and it's just sort of gut checks wherever you can.
So now, what do you suggest then for people who want to expand their news? I know we have liberal currents, but who else would you tell people to read? Like if they were looking for people to subscribe to read.
I like Radley Balco. All right, again, all right. He's great for like civil liberty stuff. He covers uh, essentially abuses in the criminal justice system. Um, I'm forgetting her name. She writes great stuff about immigration. Dara Lind. Dara Lind, great for covering immigration stuff. Um, I do like John Gantz a lot. He's not really news exactly. He's more cultural commentary, I would say, but I like him a lot. Can't go wrong with Jamel Bowie. Jamel Bowie's amazing. Um, Greg Sargent at the Post is good. He's got like a team of people that writes for him, but he's good. Like just straight political commentary. Greg Sargent is really good. Um, yeah, I mean, there's others. I'll send a few your way maybe afterwards when I've thought about it a bit more. But there's a lot of good stuff out there, and mostly like I find there are good publications, but like really and truly I find good individuals, like individual writers, and I just stick with them wherever they go.
Gotcha. And so now, what which accounts would you recommend people following? Right. This is gonna be even. It's gonna be for even more people who can't, who don't have the attention span to read. Okay. What account would you suggest they follow?
Everyone who writes for Liver Currents, of course. um,
And the people being.
yeah, yeah. So I mentioned Paul Kreider. Um, uh, I mentioned Jason Brigham, but uh, yeah, just give me a sec. Let me just pull it. Let me give you a real answer. So Adam Rust, who occasionally edits for us and always vets um, anything legal that uh, that comes in because he is a lawyer. Um, oh yeah, you probably know Maya, right? She writes. She's like the e-monetarist girl. Um,
Yeah, she used to follow me, but then she unfollowed me. Very tragic.
uh, oh, hate it when that happens.
It was just an account change because Twitter nuked me.
I see. Um, so um, this, so, well, let's do blue sky because just trying to see what is she actually. Because so the person who someone wrote, did you hear the Eden Knight story, like what happened to Eden Knight?
Yeah, I was good friend. Actually, she's in here, but I was good friends with her for a while on Twitter.
So the author of this piece, who goes by Layla in most places, um, and so I will. Let me see. I know that. Yeah, she's emissary of night is what she is on both Twitter, I believe, and Blue Sky. So yeah, she's great, and she has great commentaries on Palestine and Israel. She's been like one of the main people that I've been paying attention to for that. Um, Caitlin Green is great as well. I mean, I could go on and on, but
I'm gonna shout out McManus just because
of
I
course,
really like that the Plastic Pills podcast.
no, McManus is great. Can't go wrong. He is a machine. Like I cannot believe the sheer amount that guy writes of just like incredibly intricate philosophy. It's
Oh yeah,
amazing.
his every other week, his like every other week article that always delivered at the exact same time and will always be a banger.
Um, so Samantha Hancock's Lee um, is one of my favorites that we got on board in the last 2 years, maybe at this point. Feels more recent than that. She and I see very, very eye to eye on things. Like I wrote a piece about essentially how to restructure the the balance of power in the United States. Like, and the main idea of it was the worst things in the US aren't even at the state level, they're at the local level. And you could do a lot just by kicking things up to the state level. So, for example, policing, there's one of the reasons that it's so hard to reform policing in the US is because it's an incredibly local thing. Like, so when you go to one horrible place and reform it, that doesn't really have any influence beyond that one place. Um, so the idea was make policing systems at the state level, take them away from local governments entirely, um, and just sort of like have an integrated thing that. So if one cop is, because right now if a cop gets fired in one town, he could just go a town over and start working there. But if it's a whole state system, you can fire them and then they can't work anywhere in the state. Little things like that. She's written sort of a follow up to that, and it's always about that. Like, think actually about how the status quo structures power, and think about what changes would actually change that structure. So she's She's great. Highly recommend Samantha Hancocksley. Um, yeah. Oh, Matthew Downhauer. Do you know him?
Again, there's a bunch of people I've probably heard of, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
fair
know
enough.
how and why.
Yeah, so I mean, I could keep going on. There's a lot. If you look at our either on Twitter or on Blue Sky, the Liberal Currents account itself, we follow anyone who's written for us. Um, so you can look there. We also just on Liberal Currents, we list their names. Sorry, just one second. I'm back. Sorry about that. I think I'm gonna have to wrap up soon, though.
Okay, so we'll do the wrap up things. Can you? So if you had to share one non-political interest you have, what would that be? Just a surprise one.
A surprise one.
Yeah, like
Let's see.
surprise interest.
How dweeby should I be? I would say anime. Probably not surprising
Okay,
to most
I
people who know
respect
me.
that. One more thing. Okay, give me give me the couple sentence. Let's say you're writing a thesis, right? Give me the thesis, okay? On again for why we should be a liberal and what liberalism means to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that liberalism, and especially liberal democracy itself as a form, um, is the only form of, it's the best form of society suited to modern conditions. And assuming we're going to live in a world with modern technology and modern capacities to move things and people and ideas quickly over large spaces, uh, I don't think we're going backwards in time. We're going, if anything, we're getting more and more so, right? We can move things faster. We can communicate faster and further. Um, Liberal democracy is the best suited to uh, get things done effectively without shutting people out. While retaining an openness in a world where every individual has the capability, just because of the way that the world is now, to be, smart, educated, capable, and so liberal democracy can make the best use of people's talents. It can allow them to find the best lives for themselves, um, and all while not sort of like falling apart into the bad kind of anarchy. Not the ideal anarchy, but splintering into a failed state or something like that. Um, so my pitch is liberal democracy institutionally is the best for the modern world. Liberalism as a tradition is an incredibly good way of thinking about that form.
So now tell us where we can find you. Tell us some, and then tell us where we can find you on Twitter, Blue Sky, what the website is, and anywhere else we can find you.
Yep. So it's liberalcurrents.com, and the Blue Sky is I did the custom domain, so it's just liberalcurrents.com for its account. adamgurry.liberalcurrents.com for me, and just Adam Gurry for Twitter. Um, yeah, that's me.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for the interview. I'll try to get this uploaded as soon as possible. Thank you for
Great.
making
Yeah.
time. Thank you for coming on early. That gave us a little bit more time to get the podcast done.
Yep. Yep.
And yeah, we'll be talking to another lib sock soon. I mean, another liberal soon. I'm being invaded. The pod is being invaded by these
Awesome.
liberal intruders. Thank you again for
All
coming
right.
on. I'll try to get this uploaded as soon as possible. Bye.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bring showers.